Multiplying numbers with digits in the decimal places works almost exactly the same as multiplying whole numbers, but with one extra step. Let's take a look at a multiplication problem in which we have two numbers that we are multiplying together, and both of these numbers have decimal places. So we are asked to multiply together here 1.4 times 0.21. So let's start by setting this problem up. We are going to set this up vertically, like we do with our other multiplication problems, like we've looked at multiplying two-digit numbers together. We set those up vertically. But in this case, since we have decimals, we don't need to line up the digits that are in the ones place and the tens place and the hundreds place. We're going to do it a little bit differently. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our 1.4 on top. So I'm just going to write this problem as it is written. So I'm going to do 1.4, and so what we're going to do is, in this case, we're just going to line up the last digits in each of our numbers, not really worrying about what place value they hold. So my 1.4, I'm going to line this 4 up with this 1. So I'm going to put my 2, 1 here, and my 0 out front, and rewrite my problem vertically stacked like we have been doing with our other multiplication problems. So I lined up the last digit of each number, and then I lined up the next to last digit of each number, and then here, in this case, I've got my decimal point and this 0 out front. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to eliminate the decimal points in my multiplication problem before I begin doing the multiplication. But before I do that, I actually want to count how many digits each of my numbers has to the right of the decimal point. And so we are going to count basically the total number of decimal places in both numbers. So in my top number, I have 1 digit to the right of the decimal point. And so I'm going to make a little mark over here of 1, just to remind myself there. In my second number here, I have 2 digits to the right of the decimal points. So I basically have 2 digits in the decimals. So anything to the right of the decimal point, I'm going to call that in my decimals. So I have 2 in this one. So what I want to do is I want to add up and find a total number out of both of my numbers, the total number of decimal digits, or digits in the decimal places that I have. So in this particular problem, I have a total number of 3. And I'm just going to write that for myself over there, that I have 3, because at the end, when we're finished doing all of our multiplying and our adding up of the products, I need to account for those 3 decimal places and make sure that my answer has 3 digits in the decimal places as well. So you'll see how that turns out as we do this. So we are going to eliminate our decimal points, and we're just going to simply do the multiplication on this problem as if we were multiplying together 2 whole numbers. So I'm going to begin by multiplying the 14 times the digit that's in my ones place in my second number on the bottom here. In this case, it's going to be really simple because I have a 1 in my ones place. So I simply need to multiply 1 times 4, and I put my answer here in the first column, and I multiply 1 times 1 and put my answer here. So I'm treating this as if I'm multiplying 2 whole numbers together and doing the exact same steps that I do for multiplication of whole numbers. But I do remember in the back of my mind that these are decimals, and I'm going to have to add those decimals back in when I come up with my final answer. So I do my 1 times 4, 1 times 1, and then when I go over here and work on the multiplication of the digit in my tens column, if I were working with whole numbers, then I know that I need to make sure and put my 0 here to hold that place, put my 0 in the ones place, and now we're working over here in the tens column, the tens place. So now I want to multiply 2 times the 14, or 14 times 2. So I do that also, one step at a time. 2 times 4, I have my multiplication tables memorized. 2 times 4 equals 8. So I simply write my answer of 8 right here in this column. And then 2 times 1 equals 2. And I move over to my next column and I place my answer 2 there. Now I don't need to worry about the 0 because we know that 0 times anything equals 0. And so we would just end up with a bunch of zeros that don't count for anything. So we're not going to worry about this 0. This 0 here is actually good though because it reminds us that we're working on decimals. So now we're going to do our next step like we do when we're multiplying whole numbers, and we're going to add these two products together. So I'm adding the product of my ones place multiplication plus the product of my tens place multiplication of 14 times 20, which is 280. So I add these two together, very simple addition. 4 plus 0 equals 4, and moving over to my tens place, 8 plus 1 equals 9. And I place my 9 here, and then in the hundreds place, 2. So 294 is my answer. This is the point at which I go back to this number, the total number of digits to the right of the decimal point. The total number of decimals in my problem has to match and be the same as the total number of decimals in my answer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look down here and see that I've got 1, 2, 3 digits in my answer. And so my decimal point has to go right here in order to have 3 digits to the right of the decimal. If this number were, for example, a 2, then I would just simply be going over and putting my decimal place here so that I would have 2 digits to the right of the decimal point. But in this case it's 3, so I put my decimal point here, and since all decimal numbers need to have a digit in the ones place to the left of the decimal point, I'm going to place a 0 here so that I'm reporting my answer correctly. So 1.4 times 0.21 might look quite difficult when we first see it because of all these decimals, but we really can simplify it to a whole number multiplication problem and then go back in and put our decimal in to the answer. 1.4 times 0.21 equals 0.294.